Hi, it's Keith from the Evangelical Free Church, and we're continuing our series of short talks in the Gospel of Luke. And today it's Luke 24, verses 13 to 32. And the passage starts, "Now on the same day," and we're introduced to two disillusioned disciples. They're probably not part of the inner circle. Well, they're definitely not part of the inner circle. One is named Cephas, the other is probably his wife, and they're heading back to their hometown, which is about 7-8 miles from Jerusalem. And they are disillusioned, as we see, because of all the things that have happened. They actually say in verse 19, which we'll be looking at later in this passage, when asked about what's happened, they say about Jesus of Nazareth, "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before all the people. The chief priests and the rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped he was the one who was going to redeem Israel." Their hopes have been completely shattered, but they're going to be in for a big surprise. Richard Dawkins, in his book The God Delusion, says that the Bible is 66 books with little or no relationship to each other. I'm hoping by the end of this talk, we'll be seeing that that is not something we can agree with. Jesus draws near. Jesus approaches them and asks them what they're talking about. They basically say, "Well, haven't you heard? It's the talk of the town." And then they repeat the verse I just read. You see, their world is completely shattered. There seems nothing more to happen. Yet there's been some strange stuff going on. Verse 22, "In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the woman had said, but they did not see him." The mystery deepens. Jesus now comes straight to the heart of the subject. Just listen to his words. Verse 25 to 27. He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow of heart you are to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things, then enter his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself." He basically gives them a tour of their scriptures, or what we would call the Old Testament. And he would have gone to Genesis 3, verse 15, where there's a promise of God bringing salvation. Even though sin has just entered the world, God is going to set it right. I suspect he spent a lot of time in the whole of Psalm 22, which starts, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The cry that Jesus gives from the cross. And yet goes on to talk about the one who has been downtrodden, the one who has suffered, being exalted. Isaiah 53, the passage in verses 1 to 12 that is known as the suffering servant, which I've quoted from in these talks. Deuteronomy 21, an obscure couple of verses where it talks about cursed is anyone who's hung on a tree. They are cursed by God. And my word, the Apostle Paul, when he writes to the Galatian church in Galatians 3, verses 10 to 13, really opens that up, that Christ became a curse for us. He took our sin. These disciples are so enthralled, they ask him to stay the night. But then, just as suddenly as he appeared on the road, he is gone. Their reaction is interesting, to say the least. Verse 32, they asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" Here's the thing. They knew the scriptures, but they'd only really looked at those scriptures or remembered those scriptures that they wanted to remember. They saw the Messiah as the coming warrior king, which he was. He had defeated Satan decisively. But they hadn't registered the stories of the suffering servant. Now that throws up a challenge for us. We see that these disciples were so excited they literally take off back to Jerusalem, but more about that next week. What we need to do when we look at the scriptures is to read it all, to take it to heart. It's interesting to note what Jesus said about himself and the scriptures. He talks about in John's Gospel, in chapter 39, when he's talking to the religious leaders, he says this: "You diligently study the scriptures because you think by them you possess eternal life. These are the scriptures that testify about me." And later he says this, and this is remarkable: "If you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But since you do not believe what he wrote, how are you going to believe what I say?" Jesus is referring back to the law and the prophets there. The Psalms, as I said, Psalm 22, a prime example. The law of Moses, which he had written down. Moses had written about Christ. There was even that little reference I'd noted in Deuteronomy 21, "Cursed is anyone who hung on a tree." We need to examine the scriptures as a whole. Maybe you've never actually read the Bible. Maybe you've got a copy knocking around somewhere, but it's in Old English and you don't really know where to start. Well, let me make you an offer. We have Bibles here, free, completely free, with a reading plan that will get you into the Bible. You're very welcome to have one, to take one. You'll probably best have to come into the church and take one on a Sunday, or get in touch with me through email. You can find that on the website. If you Google EFCSS, you'll get to our website, and you have contact details there, and you can contact me through email there. But we're making this offer. We've got loads to give away. We'd love you to have a chance to examine the claims of Jesus and to see how he is found in all the scriptures, and to find these things for yourself. Thank you for listening.